I want to start with a frustration that I think a lot of us feel when we're just scrolling through the news. You look at global politics, Russia's moves in Ukraine, China building, literal islands out of sand, and it often feels completely irrational.
Right.
You're left wondering, is this just ego? Is it paranoia? Some leader trying to secure a legacy?
It's this feeling that world leaders are playing a game of risk where only they know the rules.
Exactly. It feels like ideology or, personality on a massive scale. But I've been reading through our source for today, Tim Marshall's Prisoners of Geography, and the argument is almost unsettling.
How so?
It suggests that if you strip away all the speeches, the ideologies, the Twitter wars, these leaders aren't crazy. They're just, trapped.
And that is the core thesis. We tend to judge nations by the who, Putin, Xi, Biden. But Marshall argues you have to look at the where.
Right.
The whole idea is that geography, the mountains, the rivers, the coastlines, it acts as a kind of prison. It constrains what leaders can do no matter what they actually want to do.
Okay, see, I have to push back on that right away because it sounds a little deterministic, doesn't it?
It can, yeah.
We're in the 21st century. We have the internet, hypersonic missiles, global finance. Are we really saying that a mountain range or a flat plain is dictating modern policy? Surely human agency plays a role.
Oh, human agency matters, of course. You can choose how to play the hand you're dealt.
What?
But you cannot choose the cards. And the argument here is that the map deals the hand. Even with cyber warfare, if you want to hold territory, you still need boots on the ground.
And boots on the ground have to deal with mud and mountains.
And mud and mountains and gravity, exactly.
Okay, so let's test this theory then. If the map is really the puppet master, let's look at maybe the most obvious example. Russia. When you look at Russia on a normal map, it just looks invincible. It's huge. 11 time zones.
It looks huge, but if you put on your, let's say, geopolitical X-ray glasses, Russia looks incredibly fragile. Yeah, it's defined by one terrifying feature, the North European plain. Exactly, the funnel. Think of it like this. You start in France, you move east, the land is flat. In Poland, that flat plain is pretty narrow, about 300 miles wide. It's a bottleneck.
Okay.
But as you move toward the Russian border, the funnel opens up. By the time you get to Russia, that flat, indefensible plain is 2,000 miles wide.
So economically, flatland is usually a good thing. Great for farming, transport. But you're saying militarily, it's a nightmare.
It's a complete nightmare. It is a superhighway for invasion. And this isn't, theoretical for Moscow.
No.
They've been invaded across this plain by the Poles, the Swedes, Napoleon, Hitler. When Putin looks west, he doesn't see potential trading partners. He sees a massive, indefensible front door that has been kicked in repeatedly for 500 years.
This really reframes that whole expansionism narrative, doesn't it?
It flips it on its head.
Because we see Russia pushing into Ukraine or Georgia, and we think, empire building.
Classic empire building, yeah.
But the geography suggests it's actually more of a panic response. They're trying to plug the gap.
It's the whole concept of strategic depth. If you can't lock your front door, you want the hallway leading to it to be as long as humanly possible.
And the West is that hallway.
Russia needs to control the land to its west, Ukraine, Belarus, Poland, to push any potential threats back to the narrowest part of that funnel. Every time NATO expands eastward, it shrinks that buffer zone, and the alarm bells in Moscow just ring off the hook.
It's like a claustrophobic reaction, but in reverse. Fear of open spaces. But what about the ocean? Russia has a massive coastline. Why are they so obsessed with land buffers if they have all that sea access?
Because they are a land giant, but they're a maritime prisoner. Most of that massive coastline is useless.
How so?
The Arctic ports like Murmansk are frozen solid for half the year. Vladivostok, way out in the east, is ice-locked for months, and even when it's open. To get to the Pacific, you have to sail through the Sea of Japan.
Which is controlled by Japan and, by extension, the U.S. Navy.
Correct. They are completely boxed in. And this brings us to the obsession with Crimea. When the annexation happened in 2014, the West was talking about sovereignty and international law, and rightly so. But from a cold, hard map perspective, losing influence in Ukraine meant potentially losing the lease on the port of Sevastopol.
Or warm water port.
Their only true major warm water port with access to the wider world. Without Sevastopol, Russia basically ceases to be a global naval power. Their fleet would have nowhere to park in the winter.
Wow.
So while the method was political aggression, the driver was just geographical survival.
That's a terrifying thought, that a nation might start a war just to keep a parking spot for its boats. But let's flip the script. Russia's panicked because it's too open. Let's look at China. To me, China has always felt like the opposite, historically, walled off.
That is a great distinction. If Russia is a prisoner of the open plain, China is a prisoner of the fortress.
Fortress.
Yeah. The heart of China, the Han Heartland, is fertile, it's populous, and it is incredibly well protected.
By the three walls, right? You've got the Gobi Desert up north, the jungles in the south, and then the Pacific Ocean to the east.
And in the west, the biggest wall of all, the Himalayas. And this is where the map really explains the tension over Tibet.
Okay.
We usually hear about Tibet through the lens of human rights or cultural suppression. But if you look at a topographical map, Tibet isn't just a region, it's the high ground.
It's a watchtower looking down into the Chinese living room.
Precisely. If a hostile power, say, India, were to control Tibet, they would have a strategic advantage that Beijing just finds intolerable. But there's an even more critical reason.
Which is?
Water.
Right. Tibet is often called China's water tower.
The Yellow River and the Yangtze, the absolute lifeblood of Chinese agriculture and industry, they both start in Tibet.
So this isn't just about military high ground, it's about who controls the faucet.
You got it. If you control Tibet, you control the tap. For a country with 1.4 billion people to feed and hydrate, letting anyone else hold that tap is an existential risk.
So that's why, despite all the international outcry, China will never, ever let go of Tibet. The geography simply won't allow it.
It can't.
Okay, so they've secured their land fortress, but you mentioned earlier they're building artificial islands. That implies they don't feel safe at sea.
And this is the great paradox of modern China. They become this global trading superpower, which means they have to ship goods out and bring oil in. But their entire coastline is hemmed in by what strategists call the first island chain.
Let's visualize that. If you're sailing out from Shanghai, what do you hit?
You hit a wall of islands. Japan, Okinawa, Taiwan, the Philippines, all the way down to Borneo. It's like a picket line in the ocean.
And almost all of those are American allies or have American naval bases.
Exactly. In a conflict, the U.S. Navy could effectively blockade China inside its own coastal waters. They're trapped. And it gets worse. Look at the Strait of Malacca.
That tiny little strip of water between Malaysia and Singapore.
Uh-huh. Something like 80% of China's oil imports go through that one choke point.
A choke point that's patrolled by the U.S. Navy.
China is terrified that in a war, the U.S. could just turn off their entire economy by closing that strait.
So when we see them building airstrips on coral reefs in the South China Sea, or claiming the entire ocean with that 9-dash line, it's not just flexing.
It is a breakout attempt. They are trying to push the American naval presence back far enough to ensure they can't be strangled in their own backyard. They're trying to turn their maritime prison into a buffer zone.
It really seems like everyone we've talked about so far is anxious. You've got Russia paranoid about the flatlands, China feeling claustrophobic about the islands. Is there anyone on the map who actually has it easy, who won the geographical lottery?
Oh, there is one undisputed, hands-down winner. The United States.
I suspected you were going to say that. It really does feel like the U.S. is playing on easy mode.
It absolutely is. First, defense. The U.S. is flanked by the two largest oceans on Earth. It is unbeatable real estate.
The ultimate moats.
The ultimate moats.
Yeah.
To the north, you have the Canadian Shield and ice. To the south, deserts. Invasion is a logistical impossibility.
So they're safe. But safety doesn't equal wealth. What makes the U.S. an economic superpower? Is it just resources?
It's the rivers. And specifically, it is the Mississippi River Basin. We often overlook this, but the United States has more miles of navigable internal waterways than the rest of the world combined.
Combined. That is a staggering statistic. But why does that matter so much in the age of trucking and air freight?
Because of the physics of friction. Moving a ton of cargo by water costs a tiny fraction of what it costs by road or rail.
Yeah.
In the 19th and 20th centuries, this allowed the U.S. to grow crops in the Midwest and just float them down to New Orleans and out to the global market for pennies. It was a capital generation machine that no other country could compete with.
So while Europe was fighting over borders and dealing with mountains, the U.S. was just floating cash down a giant, lazy river.
Effectively, yes. That river network integrated the American economy naturally, it unified the country, and now you add the energy layer on top of all that.
A shale revolution.
Right. With fracking, the U.S. is now largely energy independent. And this is a massive geopolitical shift. Well, if the U.S. doesn't need Middle Eastern oil, and it has giant ocean moats protecting it, it changes the entire calculation of global involvement.
The pivot. We keep hearing about the U.S. pulling back from being the world's policeman.
Geography gives them the luxury of that choice. Russia and China have to be aggressive just to secure their own borders. The U.S. can choose to engage or disengage. That is the ultimate power of geography.
Let's cross the Atlantic to Europe then. You mentioned how the U.S. rivers unified the country, but Europe has plenty of rivers. The Rhine, the Danube. Why didn't they unify Europe in the same way?
Because the great rivers of Europe don't meet. They flow outward like spokes on a wheel. The Rhine flows north, the Danube flows east.
The Po flows east, the Ebro south.
Exactly. This created distinct, separate spheres of influence which became distinct nations. But the real modern tension in Europe, the one that's threatening the EU, is the north-south divide.
We saw this explode during the financial crisis, and the narrative was very cultural. You know, the frugal Germans versus the profligate Greeks.
And Marshall argues that that narrative is lazy and, frankly, unfair. It completely overlooks the topography.
How?
Northern Europe, Germany, France, the Low Countries, sits on that same North European plain we talked about. It's flat, it's fertile, it's interconnected by these navigable rivers. Moving goods is cheap, integration is easy.
And the south?
Spain, Italy, Greece, mountainous, rugged. The rivers are short and fast. You can't float a barge down a river that dries up in the summer or flows off a cliff.
So the cost of just doing business is physically higher.
Much higher. Take Greece. It's not just mountains, it's the islands. Greece has thousands of islands. It is exorbitantly expensive to provide electricity, schools, security to thousands of disconnected rocks in the sea.
And defense, I'd imagine.
Right, you have to patrol all that water. Germany doesn't have that cost. So when you lock these two very different geographies into a single currency, the euro, you create a trap.
Because normally, the poorer geography would devalue its currency to stay competitive.
Exactly. But Greece can't do that. So the rich north gets richer because its geography supports high-efficiency trade, and the south just accumulates debt trying to overcome its own topography. It's not a morality play, it's a map problem.
That really changes the empathy equation on the whole Eurozone crisis. But if we're talking about difficult maps, we have to talk about Africa. The book seems to suggest this is maybe the most tragic example of geography as a barrier.
It is. And it starts with a misconception. We think we know what Africa looks like, but the standard Mercator map, the one in every classroom, it lies to us. It shrinks Africa.
Right. In reality, you can fit the US, China, India, and most of Europe inside the continent of Africa.
It is immense. But isolation is the theme here. First, the isolation from the rest of the world. The Sahara Desert is basically a sea of sand that cut off sub-Saharan Africa from Eurasian technology exchange for millennia.
So ideas like the wheel or gunpowder just didn't travel south easily?
Correct. But the bigger issue is actually the coastline. If you look at Europe or North America, the coast is jagged. It's full of natural harbors, bays, inlets. It invites you to park a boat and build a trading city.
And Africa's coast.
It's incredibly smooth. There are very few natural deepwater harbors. Even though the continent is huge, it's remarkably difficult to actually get goods on and off ships.
And then the rivers, we just praised the Mississippi for being a superhighway. Africa has the Nile, the Congo, the Zambezi. Why aren't they superhighways?
Because of the terrain. Africa is essentially a series of high plateaus. The rivers flow across the flat top and then, boom.
Waterfalls.
Massive waterfalls. Victoria Falls is stunning for tourism, but it is a dead end for a cargo ship. You simply cannot sail from the interior of Africa to the ocean.
So the rivers actually isolate communities rather than connecting them.
Exactly. This hindered the development of large-scale internal markets long before colonialism ever arrived. But then colonialism did arrive, and the Europeans just drew lines on the map.
The famous ruler borders. Straight lines that totally ignore the landscape.
And this is where the geography meets modern political tragedy. Look at the Democratic Republic of Congo, the DRC. Marshall calls it an egg without a chicken.
That's a vivid image, but what does it actually mean for the people there today?
It means the borders contain this vast, disconnected area. Rainforests, mountains, rivers that don't connect, that no central government can effectively control. The geography actually subsidizes rebellion.
How does it do that?
Well, if the capital city, Kinshasa, is 1,000 miles away from the mineral resources in the east, and there's no river or road to easily move troops between them, then the local warlord has the geographical advantage.
I see.
They can control the mine, sell the minerals, buy weapons, and the government physically can't get there to stop them.
So the geography creates a power vacuum that chaos just fills.
Precisely. The state exists on the map, but on the ground, the terrain prevents the state from even functioning. It ensures instability.
It's heavy stuff. It makes you realize that so much of nation building or development aid is like trying to apply software patches to a fundamental hardware problem.
That's a brilliant way to put it.
So we've toured the world, we've seen Russia panic-proofing its planes, China trying to break out of its maritime jail, the US sitting on its golden throne of rivers, and Africa fighting against its own shape. The big question is, does this ever change? I mean, technology bends the rules. We have planes, the internet. Does the prison ever break?
Technology bends the bars for sure, but it doesn't break the prison. We could fly over the Himalayas, yes.
Yeah.
But moving an army or millions of tons of grain or a pipeline, that still has to obey the laws of physics and topography.
The mountains are still there.
The mountains are still there. The North European plain is still flat. The rivers of Africa still have waterfalls. We are seeing a lot of digital and ideological conflict right now. But when push comes to shove, like we see in Ukraine or the South China Sea, the map is still the ultimate arbiter.
It's a humbling perspective. We like to think we're the masters of our destiny, the captains of our souls. But it turns out the river valley you were born in might have already cast a vote for you.
It raises a pretty provocative thought, which is, how much of history is actually made by great men and women, and how much is just people acting out the script written by tectonic plates millions of years ago?
That is going to keep me up tonight. Next time you read a headline about a conflict halfway across the world, don't just look at the faces of the leaders. Open up a map, look at the terrain. It might just tell you the story they aren't saying out loud.
Usually does.
Thanks for diving deep with us. We'll see you next time.